Hello, and welcome back to the World of Wysteria. We will now continue with part 2 of chapter 14. Emily then leaned back on her elbows and closed her eyes. Will gazed at her lovingly. Such a beautiful girl, with such a beautiful spirit, he thought. His feelings for her grew stronger each day they were together. "Why did you visit Nathan's world?" he asked her. "Youthful curiosity, you could say, although stupidity is closer to the truth," Emily confessed. While exploring, Charlotte came across his world. She described the place to me, and even though it sounded terrifying, I wanted to see it. I thought it would be like watching a scary movie or visiting a haunted house. Fright can be exhilarating, but nightmares may follow. I begged her to take me, and one night she did. We tried to stay in the background. We just wanted to observe. But somehow I caught Nathan's attention. He and several of his men approached me. He was polite at first, but then the look in his eye, it gave me the creeps. Charlotte told him we had to go, but he took my hand and insisted that I come with him, saying that he wanted to give me a proper welcome. I laughed in his face, Emily said with a chuckle, and he took offense. Charlotte understood the danger and tried to be diplomatic, telling him that friends were expecting us, but that we'd be back. He just kept staring at me. When I tried to disengage my hand, his grip tightened, but I managed to pull it loose. Charlotte grabbed my other hand, and we stepped back out of his reach. Then we jumped. I thought he might try to stop us, but he just stood there, fury in his eyes. As we disappeared, he cursed us, calling us something nasty, whores, I believe, and I said something in return. "What was that?" Will asked her. "I think I called him a moron," she quietly replied. "Ah, of course," he said. It was the same insult she'd hurled at the drifter in the square. Emily then lay down on the grass, her fingers entwined behind her head, a faint, carefree smile on her lips. But Will's mind remained troubled. His thoughts turned from Emily's disturbing tale to the foiled attempt to abduct her in the plaza. Insidious emotions, anxiety, and anger stirred within him, which he felt as an increasingly uncomfortable pressure in his torso. Emily suddenly sat up. "It's different," she said. "What is?" he asked. "The sound of the falls." Will listened, and indeed it was. Not only was it louder, it had lost its melodious quality. Its voice was now harsh, like static, as if, rather than water, tons of crushed gravel now poured over the falls and through the riverbed. "It's me," he said, realizing what was happening and why. "It's my fault." His world was manifesting his state of mind, which had turned from harmonious to discordant as he contemplated the threat Nathan posed to the universe at large and to Emily in particular. "Your fault," she said. "Yes," he responded. Will knew that his mind had drifted into a dangerous current that would only gain momentum unless he could change course. Swimming back upstream Unthinking his thoughts was not an option. Fighting the current would only consume energy and, at best, leave him stranded where he was. As he'd learned from experience, rather than struggle against the onslaught of negative emotions, he had to latch onto thoughts and feelings that would carry him in a more peaceful direction. "Sorry," he said to Emily, who was now staring at him with an expression of concern and confusion. "Just give me a minute." Closing his eyes, Will flooded his mind with positive images, leaving no quarter for menacing thoughts to fester. He felt his body relax, and as the tension inside his chest loosened its grip, pleasant emotions once again began circulating through him, washing away all traces of anxiety. Once he'd regained his emotional equilibrium, the cacophony subsided, and the fluid melody of the falls returned. "Good," he said, opening his eyes and breathing a sigh of relief. "Are you okay?" she asked, clearly perplexed. "Yes," Will told her. "Everything's fine now." He explained what had happened, that his world had responded to his anxious feelings, spawned by his fears for her safety. "I'm glad you noticed that something was wrong," he said. "Otherwise, it would have gotten worse and been more difficult to stop. It's a little troubling that my world reacted so quickly to my emotions." "But it's a good thing, really," she said. "Why do you say that?" he asked. "Because you got immediate feedback," she replied. "You were given a clear warning that you were slipping into a destructive state of mind, and you were able to correct things before they got out of hand." "I suppose so," he said. "But it's a shame that this beautiful place pays for my negative thoughts. In the waking world, they only affect me, not the world around me." "Actually," said Emily, "that's not true. They do. It's just not as obvious to you." Emily stood up and took Will's hand. "Okay," she said, helping him to his feet. "No more thinking about Nathan. Since he can't travel, the only way he can enter Wysteria is through your mind." She was right, of course. "Shall we visit the castle?" she asked him, brushing out the wrinkles on the light blue sundress she wore today. "We haven't been there for a while." "Sure," said Will. They took a few steps in the direction of the gate. Then Emily stopped and looked at him with a mischievous grin. "Ready?" she said. "For what?" "Set." "But I don't—" "Go!" she cried, taking off toward the castle at a full run, while he stood there, mouth open in mid-sentence. "Hey!" he shouted. "No fair!" Will's first instinct was to concede the race to her, but cry foul. She already had an insurmountable head start. However, he felt like running today. He began chasing after her, moving as fast as he could, or so he believed, and he was able to close the gap between them. But Emily still had quite a lead and was now nearly halfway to the entrance of the castle. He tried to run still faster and found, to his great surprise, that he could. His stride lengthened as his feet skimmed across the ground, hardly touching the grass. It felt as if some invisible force were pulling him forward, while his legs struggled to keep up. Just before Emily reached the drawbridge, Will caught up to her. He tapped the back of her left shoulder as he passed by her right side and flew through the open gate. Without stopping, she twisted her head to see what had touched her and ended up spinning in a complete circle, nearly falling as she passed through the entrance and into the inner courtyard. Emily stumbled forward, trying to regain her balance, but finally collapsed, first dropping to her knees, then falling flat onto her back, laughing and trying to catch her breath, while Will coasted to a stop. He walked over to where she lay sprawled on the ground and sat down next to her. "I win," he declared. "Yes, you did," she replied, now breathing more slowly. "And even with that unfair start, little Miss Jump the Gun," he added. "Unfair," she said, feigning indignation. "I clearly said, ready, set, go. Besides, I think you're the one who cheated." "I cheated," said Will. "How's that?" "You were running too fast," she answered matter-of-factly. "You're not allowed to run faster than me." "Ah, I see." "And passing someone, though not strictly illegal, is very rude." "I apologize," he said. "I guess I didn't understand the rules of the game." "Obviously not, Will." Then she smiled and rolled onto her back, facing him. "I'll forgive you, though," she continued, "but only because I—" Emily caught herself in mid-sentence and paused. Their eyes met, and Will understood what she hesitated to say. She seemed about to speak the words, but before she could, Will bent down and kissed her on the cheek. "I love you, Emily," he said softly in her ear. She turned her head and looked into his eyes, tears welling in hers. "And I love you, Will." Okay, well, that concludes chapter 14, and we will return with chapter 15.